Blessings, good evening to you all. It's Tuesday night, so that means Q&A night. So, get straight into it. 3 bows and my gratitude to Luang Por. When we start to understand the Tirakkhana Sutta, every year in the first week of April, as Buddhists, we offer food, dana, to the monks in conjunction with the Qingming festival. It is also known as Sweeping Day, Chinese Memorial Day, or Ancestors' Day. It is a good opportunity for us to show our gratitude and to share the merit accrued to our ancestors in the event they are born as hungry ghosts. However, not all family members are Buddhist. The question is, do we need to follow them to the cemetery or columbarium on that day, as they believe they have to be there physically to make offerings of food to the ancestors, even though we have done the dana to the monastics. Thank you. So the question is, if we've already done dana, say Sangha dana, or made merit with monks on the behalf of our departed relatives, do we also need to go to the cemetery? Well, there may be different reasons you follow a group of your family or relatives to the cemetery. As you say, some of them may not be Buddhists, so they don't do Buddhist ceremonies, but they still want to honor and remember relatives. So if you have the time and you're available, well, why not? You could follow them, join them out of kindness and for family harmony and to support them, because it's still a good thing to do that, to remember our departed relatives. But an important thing is the view or the belief you have as you go there. So like you say, you place food there, you don't have to do that. If you've already made some merit with Sangha, that's already a very powerful, good merit. So when you go, you don't necessarily have to take any material offerings. You can just go and join your family out of compassion for them, the living, so for family harmony. It's an opportunity to see the grave. Maybe it needs a bit of work or something needs to be done. So there's the practical side of it. And then you can do your own sharing of merit from your practice, your meditation and your practice while whatever service is being performed, you can do that. But the important thing is what you're believing at that time, and you're focused. If you're practicing what the Buddha taught, you're focused more on developing dana, sila, bhavana, or sila samadhi panya, which is always leading to the arising of wholesome states of mind. Your mind brightens with those wholesome states. And so then if you're thinking of departed relatives, as your mind brightens, you can share that merit with them, think of them and dedicate the merits of your practice to them. So the Buddha pointed out that offering Sangha dana is the most powerful kind of merit or dana that we can do. It doesn't mean to say it's the only one, so we can also join in other rituals and ceremonies, but keep our right view that the Sangha dana that we perform is the most powerful. So make sure, if you want to help your ancestors, I would recommend doing that. But you can still join in these other rituals, but just keep your right views, because sometimes superstitious beliefs come in. Say, like someone might say, "Oh, you didn't attend the Chengmeng ritual at the cemetery. You've made bad karma." Well, that's not sure yet, is it? It depends on your state of mind and what your reasoning is. Maybe you've just made your good karma in another way. But then you also want to keep family harmony, so I wouldn't deliberately annoy them or provoke them if they have different rituals and beliefs. Well, you can still sympathize and be supportive in your own way. But maybe you have to consider each family group is slightly different, so you have to consider what's the most appropriate way to support the family on that occasion. As far as Theravada Buddhists go, many Chinese Theravada Buddhists don't do much on Qingming. They do more, in their usual practice of offering dana, temples, monasteries, supporting sangha, and that for them is good enough. But you have to see what's appropriate. And as far as ancestors go, whether they can receive merit or not, well, that will depend on their state of mind, wherever they've been reborn. So the Buddha did point out that petas, hungry ghosts, there's a class of hungry ghosts that can receive merit. It can be a cause for their rebirth in a better place. So this is the origins of the practice of making merit for the dead. So we can do that with a sincere mind of kindness, compassion, invite any departed relatives to come and share in the merits that we're making. And then we step back. One other aside to this story, you may know the story of Venerable Yasa in the time of the Buddha, who was the son of a millionaire, a wealthy young man who was getting bored with his playboy life, music, girls, good food, entertainment. And one night it all came to a head when he noticed all the party goers falling asleep after the party. They're all just lying there snoring and dribbling and looking in disarray, uninspiring. He just felt, I don't want to do this anymore. And he went off to find a teacher. He wanted to learn meditation. And they say he spontaneously was having asupa nimittas, visions of corpses, skeletons, and so on, which gave him a great sense of disenchantment with the world, and he was turning away from the normal kind of seeking pleasure and fun in the world. And these nimittas were very powerful for him, and this is a very common theme if you read the biographies and hear the stories of some of the modern teachers, including Ajahn Chah. Sometimes they have these visions of seeing themselves as a corpse, or see other people as corpse. These are insights into the three characteristics of existence, the impermanent nature of the body. So yes, I had that, and they said this was the result of previous karma, good karma he'd made in previous lives, going to graveyards, cremation grounds, graveyards, and cleaning up the graves of people who had been buried or just left there, and nobody had really done the proper rituals or burials for them. So he would do this with a group of friends. They would take the corpses or the bones and they'd do some ceremony and bury them properly, give them the kind of proper funeral out of compassion. And this left a very deep impression in his mind, and so in the last life as Yasa, some of these images came back to him and supported his practice of meditation and led him to become a monk, and he became arahant, enlightened. So if you travel to a cemetery, monks quite often do this. They go and visit cemeteries or even stay in them when they're on tudong, camping, wandering tour. They'll camp in cemeteries, and there's that aspect of the experience. Other people may go there out of a ritual, out of some kind of feeling of family obligation, and that's one aspect. But then you can go there and just contemplate the impermanence of life, that everybody must die, and all your ancestors, eventually they die and they become corpses, and we bury them or we cremate them. So it can also be just a reflection on the impermanence of life. And you reflect back on yourself. One day I will become a corpse, I'll get buried or cremated in the same way. And it can be a cause for your insight into the impermanent nature of life, your life, and letting go of attachment. So that's another benefit from an occasion like that. If you do join your family, then it's a chance to contemplate the impermanence of this world and letting go of attachment. Forgiving enemies and family members who you may have bad feeling for, letting go of attachment to the world, ambitions, desires, material wealth, and so on. So, you just do the best in different situations. If you have to join some kind of family ceremony, that's fine. Use it as a chance to reflect on the Dhamma, maybe. Another question. Is any type of anusati a bhavana? So anusati is this Pali word. It means to recollect, to reflect on, to contemplate, to hold in mind. So we have from the suttas, you can glean there's 10 major anusatis, or recollections. Recollection of Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha, Buddha anusati, Dhamma anusati, Sangha anusati. There's Chaka anusati, recollection of the sacrifices and the charity, the dana one has performed. Sila anusati, recollection of one's sila and the qualities of a mind that keeps sila. So particularly, the hiriyottapa and the precepts you've kept and the states of mind that develop, and the happiness of keeping sila as well. Recollection of devas, the qualities of a deva. Again, hiriyottapa, deva anusati, or devata anusati. So that's 6. And then there's Gaya Gada Sati, recollection of the body. Marananusati, recollection of death as an object of mind. Anapanasati, so recollection of the breath, which is something that probably many of you do already. And then Upasamanusati, it's probably the least known of these 10 anusatis. Upasamanusati means recollection of peace, and it works. One I definitely recommend you to experiment, try recollecting the theme of peace as an object of mind. So whether it's in terms of a word or a string of words, or a recollection of the theme of peace, what peace means to you, so just thinking it through, you can begin anusati meditations as a discursive training in just using the thinking mind to recollect a theme, a subject. Or sometimes I've found it quite useful just to recollect the peaceful mind. If you've experienced peace before, what did that feel like? What was the state of mind? The state of the peaceful mind. So recollecting it, the qualities of peace, bringing it up, and it can take you straight into samadhi. So bhavana, this is the word that means cultivation, mental cultivation. So it's cultivation of the mind. So it's often translated as meditation. So very close to anusati, but bhavana can be a super bhavana, as I mentioned earlier. Venerable Yasa practiced that, a super bhavana. So contemplating or focusing the mind on there's 10 corpse meditations, or the aspect of the unattractiveness of the body. But then we have metta bhavana, then we have the 4 sublime abidings, they're all forms of bhavana. So metta, kindness, karuna, compassion, mudita, sympathetic joy, upekkha, equanimity. There's other forms of meditation objects that we can use to develop the mind through bhavana. And then we have samatha bhavana, so using a meditation object to develop states of one-pointedness, or samadhi. And then vipassana bhavana, developing insight by focusing the mind on the 3 characteristics, universal characteristics of existence. So, anicca, impermanence; dukkha, suffering or unsatisfactoriness; anatta, not self or selflessness. So samatha bhavana, vipassana bhavana we can separate into these 2 areas, calm and insight. They're both bhavana, they're both cultivating the mind, leading as conditions leading towards nibbana, for the development of magga, phala, and then nibbana, enlightenment. So bhavana is perhaps a broader term than anusati. And something that you would call bhavana, say developing a meditation object in bhavana, could lead you to develop states of jhana, rupa jhana, arupa jhana, but then also develop magga, phala, developing insight, clear knowledge and vision that actually leads to the removal of the kilesas, or the fetters, greed, anger and delusion in all their forms. The anusati, most of them, when practiced, will lead to a state of samadhi, or what we call upajjhara samadhi. So it gets you to the point where the mind becomes one-pointed and you overcome the 5 hindrances to samadhi. But most of them don't take you directly or straight away to states of jhana, the deeper states of the mind, of samadhi. So buddhanusati is how many of the forest ajahns practiced in the beginning in their practice in Thailand, say Ajahn Man, Ajahn Chah, they recollect or recite the word Buddho, which is considered to be buddhanusati. So Buddho, the one who knows, or the knowing, that's what it means. So they're recollecting the Buddha, and particularly the quality of knowing, by reciting this word. And when one does that successfully, continuously, brings up mindfulness, reciting Buddha, it can bring you to experience upajjhara samadhi, access concentration, that's translated as, so just prior to jhana, where the hindrances subside and the mind is focused on Buddha, and its piti and sukha arise. But because it's a recollection of a word, say, or a quality of the Buddha, can't take you into jhana, it takes you to upajjhara samadhi. And so traditionally it's taught, well, at that point when you attain upajjhara samadhi, you may turn to perhaps focus on the breath, for example. So the anapanasati is one of the anusatis that does take you to jhana. But most of the other ones will take you to upajjhara samadhi, and then you may develop a meditation on the 4 elements, or anapanasati, and so on. One turns to an object that would actually take one to jhana. That's the traditional way that it's taught. So these are big issues, but I'm just giving you an overview here. Another question: Does it take both a doer and a receiver for karma to be made? Well, there is the doer. Of course, on the highest level, the ultimate level, there's no person. Everything is not self. Form is not self. Feeling is not self. Perceptions are not self. mental formations, which is where karma is made through intention. It's not self. Consciousness is not self. So on the highest level, there is no self, there is no doer or receiver of karma. No one makes karma, and so the arahant doesn't make karma anymore. But of course, we're not arahants yet, so we still use the conventions of language. So there is a doer, one who makes karma. So as we chant, we say, I am the owner of my karma, heir to my karma. Whatever karma I do, good or bad, I receive the fruits of that. Because it's convenient to use the convention of language and the idea of a self. There is a self who makes karma and receives the results of karma, good and bad, depending on the quality of the intention, good and bad. And it's a useful way to begin our practice, because there's a person here and we need to train this person, and we're still thinking in terms of a person. We have attachment to the sense of self, what we call sakkaya ditthi, self-view. And so, for convenience, we say there is one who makes karma and receives the fruits of karma. How do we receive the fruits of our karma, good and bad, is through the khandhas. So our form, our physical form, is affected by the karma we've made. And so, the Buddha said, if you're one who gets a lot of illness and injury, often that's a result of past karma coming up. Or in the short term, like you see on TV, apparently, I don't watch TV, but apparently you can watch the Oscars and someone will come along and punch another person, and instantly karma takes place. One person is punched, the other person is angry, the first person is angry, and you get all the karmic results. So, that's a very quick example of karma at work, isn't it? If you're angry and you punch someone, that person is hurt and upset, you're upset, and then many people watching are also upset. That's all the karmic reaction of that particular one single act of karma. There's a doer, there's a receiver, and on and on it goes, and probably we have to hear about it for the rest of the year or the rest of eternity perhaps. Similarly, if you're kind to someone, and occasionally they put acts of kindness on TV, I guess. Again, I don't know, I don't watch TV, but I assume sometimes you see acts of kindness, well, that brings out a totally different kind of karmic result. Someone's kind to another person, straight away that person responds with happiness, goodwill, it produces harmony, cooperation, a good feeling, and that's instant karma, isn't it? You can prove that instantly. So there is a doer and a receiver. But on the higher level, which we start to get to when we contemplate anicca, dukkha, anatta, the basis for developing vipassana, insight, then this sense of self is starting to dissolve under the investigation of these three characteristics. And then the doer and the receiver start to disappear. So, but I mean, it's still, the practice of vipassana is still karma. There's one who sits down and practices vipassana or contemplates and sees impermanence. So until the sense of self is completely transcended, one can use the concept of self and talk about a self, one who makes karma. So in the hierarchy of karma, the Buddha said, developing insight into impermanence is a very powerful kind of good karma. So, better to be born and have insight into impermanence once and live for just one day than to live for 100 years without any insight into impermanence. So if you've been on your vipassana course and had a bit of insight into impermanence, you've already made some very powerful good karma, because it's such a mind-changing, powerful mind-changing good karma that it leaves its impression on the mind for a long time to come. And of course, insight into nibbana is the best kind of karma, as all the kilesas drop away, the attachment to self, greed, anger, delusion drop away. So Once one attains Nibbana, there's no more doer or receiver of karma. Although strictly speaking you could say, well, the Arahant still receives their old karma as long as they're alive. As long as they're alive, they have a body, they have eyes, ears, tongue, nose, skin. So sense impressions are coming back to the Arahant. So even an Arahant has to experience pleasure and pain. But there's no longer a self receiving this karma, or there's no longer attachment to a self. So the karma takes place, but no further karma is stimulated. It's just old karma giving its results, and then drops away, and then there's no self who's receiving that karma. So when the Arahant dies, that's the end of it. There's no more birth, and there's no more karma being made, so no more birth. But while they're still alive, they still have to receive the fruits of their old karma. So Arahants still get sick. Even the Buddha had aches and pains and headaches and backaches. Even the Buddha had to endure people being rude or insulting him occasionally, and gossiping about him, and liking and disliking him. So Nibbana, as long as somebody is still alive, they still have their 5 khandhas, even though the mind, their consciousness is free from attachment, but they're still receiving the fruits of their old karma. So we practice on these 2 levels. As you develop deep insight into the 3 characteristics of existence, the sense of self is dropping away. This is very powerful good karma, but it's karma for the ending of karma. And ultimately the sense of self and the attachments that lead one to make karma drop away. But until that point, well, you can still use the conventional language, there is a self making karma. So even there's somebody who's meditating, doing their vipassana, developing sila, keeping the sila, we can use these terms. There's nothing wrong with it. Another question. When we wish all animals to be free from suffering, but without actual action, this wish doesn't create any strong karma, ? But just more to do with the purification of our citta. Well, the purification of a citta is a very strong good karma, isn't it? So I think having the wish that may all animals or all beings, sometimes we use the word beings, are free from suffering, it's a very powerful kind of good karma, and that purifies the mind of certain things, doesn't it? Because it's the opposite of the wish that may all beings suffer. The wish may all beings be free from suffer is opposite. So it's purifying the mind from a lot of anger and hatred and selfishness. It's a very unselfish thought. So this is why just now we chanted the Buddha's words on loving kindness. May all beings be free from suffering. May all beings, great or small, big, tall or short, coarse or refined, in any realm, any being in any realm, in any part of the world. If you're developing the thought of the Brahmavihara Dhammas, metta, karuna, this is a very powerful good karma. It's purifying your mind as you do it. To absolutely purify the mind, we also need to develop our insight into anicca, dukkha, anatta. And that's very powerful good karma that will purify the mind. But just developing the thought of kindness, compassion, has a very purifying effect, especially in meditation, because you're making a strong impression on your stream of consciousness. Even if you don't say or do anything yet, just the thought is a very powerful thought. And if you repeatedly bring that up and you meditate on it, and so you make your mind one-pointed on it, well, that's very powerful karma, even though you're just sitting there, eyes closed, silent. So it has a very powerful effect. And of course, people who develop this well and skillfully, you can feel it. So, if you've ever had the good fortune to be around somebody a monk or a nun, or occasionally a lay person who has developed samadhi and maybe even insight into the path and the fruit. Maybe you feel something really good just when they're sitting there. Just the energy of their mind is already affecting you. And you feel so happy and relaxed, and you feel something good inside, and partly it's stimulated from the effect of that person's mind. So the mind certainly can affect the world around, and just the thought of kindness is already affecting your mind, and it may affect others. Of course, it will tend to come out in speech and action as well when the occasion is right. So speech and action are stronger expressions of the mind, but if somebody's attained deep samadhi, then just the mind itself can also be a pretty strong thing, and maybe stronger than speech. Like, sometimes the Buddha, we believe, would just spread metta to someone and not speak yet, and already has a strong effect on them. Or Ajahn could do this. He could spread his metta to someone, already they feel calm and relaxed. Maybe before they were very angry or very upset, and he could calm them down, and they could sense, they're calming down in his presence, even though a word hasn't been said. So sometimes the mind is stronger than verbal or physical karma. Usually it's the other way around. Usually physical karma is the strongest, kind of obvious kind of karma, and then verbal, and then the mind is the more subtle one. But it just depends whose mind it is and how powerful the mind is. Similarly, somebody with a very negative state of mind, often you feel that. Going back to animals, like if you've ever met a tiger, sometimes the mind of the tiger is so powerful in its aggression, you feel fear, paralyzing fear, before the tiger has even pounced or done anything. If they get you in their gaze, you see their eyes, that's a pretty powerful karma as well. Their look. They haven't said anything or done anything, it's just the look. I guess looking is a form of physical karma as well. But sometimes even before the tiger has arrived, you feel the mind of the tiger. You feel something uncomfortable. So you can have a powerful negative mind state, unwholesome mind state, or a powerful wholesome mind state. But of course, a lot of the time we don't know other people's state of mind. We don't know. So speech and actions will tend to reflect it more clearly to us. But don't underestimate the power of the mind. And sometimes people are kind of skeptical or even cynical. And they think, well, what good does meditating, spreading thoughts of loving kindness for the world, for all beings, that's just being silly. Or they doubt, they have self-doubt about themselves doing it, and they have doubt about others. But if you're sincere and you train your mind in this, you'll probably get to a point where you don't doubt anymore, and you actually experience some of the power and the quality of the mind of, say, loving kindness or compassion. And if you've had your own experience once or twice, then you don't doubt it anymore. The mind can really be quite powerful. Another question. Dear Ajahn, can you please shine light on the quote by Lumpo Dun Atulo, especially the last one? Thank you. And the quote is, no matter how much you think, you won't know. Only when you stop thinking will you know. But still, you have to depend on thinking so as to know. One of those nice little Buddhist phrases which kind of ties you in knots. So no matter how much you think, you won't know. That's the normal way of seeking knowledge in the world, isn't it? You read and learn things, and then you think about it, and you try and think and think and think, and particularly when you have problems and suffering, you try and think your way out of it. I've got to find a solution, and you think and think and think and wear yourself out, and often you don't really know, you don't really see your problem clearly because the thinking gets in the way and it confuses you and brings up emotions and stirs the mind up. So then, only when you stop thinking will you know. So that's you might say, a kind of pointing to the role of samadhi in our practice. Developing samadhi through developing mindfulness on an object, like one of those anusatis or bhavana. So for example, the breath, developing mindfulness of breathing to the point where the mind becomes still and thinking stops and you're just knowing without thinking. So that's knowing without thinking, and you're not trying to solve any problems, you're not getting confused, you're just knowing, you're just mindfully aware of the breath without thinking. You're able to observe then. So it's a very good state to be in. The 5 hindrances have dropped. So there's no distraction, no desire, no anger, no sleepiness, no doubt, no worry. The mind is just knowing from moment to moment. So it's knowing without thinking. But of course, to really penetrate the Four Noble Truths, to understand suffering, its cause, and the end experience and realize the end of suffering, we need to train the mind in wisdom and insight. And insight often begins by listening to Dhamma. Thinking, back to thinking again, acquiring knowledge, listening to Dhamma, reading, listening. And that's what we call Suttamaya Panya. So the origin of wisdom is through other people, associating with Kalyana Mitta, teachers, wise people, good people. You absorb words of advice, clarification, explanation of the Dhamma. And then the second level of wisdom, what we call Jintamaya Panya, you're mulling it over, you're contemplating it, you're reflecting on what you have learnt. And that also involves some thinking, doesn't it? Thinking things through, giving wise consideration to different aspects of the practice, understanding what is wholesome Dhamma, what is unwholesome Dhamma, understanding what is Sila and how you practice Sila, evaluating your meditation object as you practice meditation, evaluating your effort and the way you're meditating and what's going on. You train in thought as well. But then when samadhi develops, you get to the point where you're just knowing phenomena as they are. So say when you practice vipassana well and successfully, you're seeing thoughts arise, pass away, feelings arise, pass away, focusing on the body, seeing the changing nature of the body. At that point, one doesn't really have to think, one is more just knowing and observing. But the thinking that you've done previously helps at that point. It's already trained the mind to a point where you have some right view, understanding. So just because your mind has stopped thinking sometimes doesn't mean to say the previous thinking you had was useless. It's just the danger with thinking, if it's not guided by mindfulness, is it tends to fall into distraction and more attachment and craving. So when he says, but still you have to depend on thinking so as to know, you guide the mind with thinking to the point where you don't need to think anymore, but the guide that the advice you gave your own mind, the way you've trained it, all plays a role. It's a factor, isn't it? So look at the Eightfold Noble Path. It begins with right view, samadhi, and that requires listening to Dhamma and thinking about Dhamma. Right aspiration, right sammasankappa, the aspiration, or we say right thoughts sometimes, thoughts rooted in renunciation, non-ill will, non-hatred. Right speech, right action, right livelihood requires thought. Right effort requires thought. Right mindfulness is where you start to see thought as just thought. And with mindfulness you can pick up thought or put it down. You're gaining mastery over your mind through right mindfulness. And then samadhi is when you become one-pointed on an object, so thought disappears. The mind becomes still. But right samadhi requires all the other 7 factors of the path as well. They're all linked and supportive of each other. So thought definitely is required in the practice, but there's also times when we drop thought. And you have to know that what you're doing at which time. When is the time to drop the thought, and when is the time to develop thought, right thinking. And this all comes through experience, doesn't it? As you practice, you become more experienced. So a very common reaction you hear, people practice meditation, they say, oh, I can't meditate, I'm thinking too much. So they obviously need to put effort into developing more mindfulness to calm the mind down, still the mind, gain more control over the mind. And then other people say, I hate thoughts, I have too many thoughts, I hate thoughts. And of course the thought, I hate thoughts, is another thought, so they tend to just compound the problem. So they have thoughts and then they get angry because they got thoughts and they think more, and they're never peaceful. That's another one you've got to get through. So, there are times when you develop the thinking mind and there's times you stop. And if you've ever had the good fortune to meet somebody who's considered an arahant, an enlightened being, you can ask them, what do enlightened beings do with thinking? And they might answer something like, well, they know thinking is not self. They've seen through it. They know thinking is impermanence, it's suffering, it's not self. So they don't attach or cling to thinking. So then you might ask, but can an enlightened person still think? And they probably answer, yes, they can think because they have the ability to think, because all human beings can think. But they use thought to do good. The enlightened being, they have no more self-interest, selfishness, greed, anger, delusion. So their mind is full of wisdom and compassion, so they may think things through to help people. So they think about Dhamma and how they can use the Dhamma to help people, how to teach people, assist people, understand people, teach them more. So an arahant like Ajahn Chah learnt some words of English. And that's thinking, isn't it? He's already enlightened, we believe. But in order to help spread Dhamma overseas and to foreigners, he learned a few words of English. Even just a few words is something, isn't it? So he'd have to use thought, memory and thought to do that. And so the arahant still thinks, but they're master of their own thoughts. Their thoughts are not bullying them or running their mind, they are in charge. So they can choose just to drop all thinking, go to silence and stillness if they want, or they can pick up thoughts and use thought as a skillful means, a skillful tool to understand things, help people. So that's what we want to get to, that point where we can pick up thought or put it down. We have that level of skill. The last question tonight is, should we teach the theme of death to children? Well, probably hard to generalize here. Depends on the situation, I'd say, the context, who the child is, what the situation is. Generally speaking, I'd say the Dhamma should not be hidden from anyone. And so if children are asking about death, well, we should address that, we should answer them. How we answer them depends on their age and their understanding and their state of mind. So if a child is easily frightened or depressed or confused, well, you have to go slowly. But I always remember when I went to Thailand and stayed in Wat Pananachat as a young monk, it's a cremation ground. Regularly cremations were taking place there, and when they had a cremation, usually it's the villagers would bring in a body, they'd have a procession from the village out to the forest where the cremation ground was. And quite often 100 people would attend, and that's not 100 old people. Most of the people who died were fairly old, but not always. Sometimes they're middle-aged or even youths. And when the procession came, everyone would come. Old people, middle-aged, youth, children, even babies, would be brought along to the funerals. And it seemed like a very healthy, good way to introduce people to one of the truths of life, is that everyone must die. Life is impermanent, we don't last forever. And children need to understand that as well, but you introduce it to them gently in very natural ways. So if they're in a position where there's friends and family have joined together for a funeral, well, that's possibly quite a good thing for them to see, because they got the supportive conditions of all their friends and family around to support them if they're feeling confused or emotional. Well, the support is there. And just to get to know that it's when death happens, it's something that affects us all. We all feel maybe love or for the person who's died, but we have sadness that they've gone. I can remember seeing my parents cry when their friends or relatives died when I was a child, and that's important, because then you see that and you start to think, well, what's going on here? And you understand a bit more about grief and the sadness and the impermanence of life. If no one tells you this and they hide you away from it, then it can be and then later on in life you sort of accidentally come across death. It can be quite shocking and you don't know how to deal with it or cope with it maybe. So I don't think we should deliberately hide kids from death, but just go slowly and just tell them in small ways, talk about the fact, when the time comes, some relative or friend has died, well, we can talk about life. There's birth, there's aging, and there's death. And these three things are part of the life experience, and try and get them to see it's just normal. But then focus on the positive things so that they don't get depressed, because often kids, when they don't understand, they get depressed, don't they? They're confused and they think, oh, we're all going to die. Life is very sad and depressing, because maybe they don't have the wisdom to process it yet. So focus on some of the positive things. So if someone they know has died, a grandparent or uncle, auntie or somebody, you focus on the good of their lives and say, we're so lucky and so fortunate we knew them and they did so many good things, and we can remember the good things and we can honor the dead. And then focus on the living. We've got to use our time well, because we know one day we won't be here. So while we're here, we can make more good karma, practice the Dhamma, do more good things in the world. So focus on the positive lessons we can learn from death. But the speed with which you open children up to death, you have to consider what's a wise speed and way to do this, and don't overwhelm them too quickly. Go in small steps perhaps. But I would recommend not hiding the fact of death from them. If it comes up, sometimes we have to talk about it, answer their questions, try and get them to see it's just part of life. It's sad, of course, but it's just part of life. It's natural, it's part of nature. Just as there's day, there's night, things born, things pass away, there's beginnings, there's endings, because the theme of impermanence flows through our life, so death is one expression of that. So I'd recommend getting them to start seeing it as just some of the normal cycles of life, death, or birth and death. So that's the last question tonight. I'll leave it there, and we can talk again next time.